Regardless of what stage of the criminal justice system you're in, I suspect that you have some questions. My name is Michael Santos. I'm the founder of Prison Professors. We're a nonprofit. We don't charge any money. We give information away so that people can work toward getting the best possible outcome. But I know a lot of people have questions. I don't typically work with all of those consumers, but my partner, Justin, does.
So every week for our Monday webinar, we have new people in our community, and it's the first time they've ever become involved in the criminal justice system. So they have little to compare it to. So they'll say, this is awful, it's a terrible system. My husband's looking at 5 years. I can't believe how long he may serve. And they don't understand how incrementally it's actually gotten better compared to when you went into the federal prison system. So can you talk about some of the incremental change and how that leads perhaps to the First Step Act?
Things were better when I came in, and I'll tell you why. In the previous video, I spoke about determinate sentences versus indeterminate sentences. When I came into the system, there was something called the United States Parole Commission. That existed. That meant that if somebody had a sentence of, say, 5 years, that for some people, depending on whether they were sentenced to what's called a B1 sentence or a B2 sentence, the day they came to prison, they would have been eligible to go home. That would have been a much better system, because, in my view, because it incentivized people to say, I've got to work to prove that prison isn't the right story for me. But there was a comprehensive crime control bill that passed in 1985 and didn't take place until November the 1st, 1987, for crimes committed after November the 1st, 1987. I came in before then. So I was under that, what's commonly known as the old law, where there were, whatever sentence the judge gave you, somebody else might have an assessment of whether prison was right for you. My case was different. I was convicted of I was a kingpin in the drug business. And that particular statute, that crime, Title 21, Section 848, made me ineligible for parole. But when I came into a system where everybody was eligible for parole. And they were all thinking about, I'm going to go before the parole board. Maybe they're going to cut me loose. And it was typically common for somebody to serve a third of their sentence in prison. Whatever their sentence was, they could, after a third, they could qualify. Even if somebody was serving a life term, after 10 years, the person could become eligible for parole, provided they weren't convicted of an 8.
So if some people convicted of murder would be eligible, but your crime, if you know, was you were ineligible, is that right?
Yes, because there were some crimes that were ineligible. I was convicted of what's called the Drug Kingpin Act. It's called continuing criminal enterprise. And it meant, it was my first time in prison. I was very young, but it had very specific elements. One, there had to be 3 or more overt acts. Do you know what an overt act is?
No.
An overt act is just simply 3 things happening in furtherance of the conspiracy. For example, hey, Justin, let's rob a bank. That conversation is not a crime yet. But if I said, Justin, let's rob a bank, you're going to need to get a car. And let's just say that you called a car company and said, hey, can I rent a car? That is an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. That starts to move it closer to a crime. A continuing criminal enterprise, there had to be 3 overt acts, okay, that were in furtherance of me leading this enterprise. The second component was you had to be a supervisor of at least 5 people. So one person drives a car, one person stores something, one person does it, 5 people. If you do that, you're advancing, maybe you're going to be a kingpin. And the third is it has to be substantial amounts of money. That's an important element because that is non-defined. So it's up to the jury. To some people, $1,000 could be a substantial amount of money. And that's fine. If those 3 overt acts are met and the prosecutor proves it, they can prove a continuing criminal enterprise. And if somebody is convicted of that crime, they are ineligible for parole by statute. It's what Congress ruled. But murder does not have that same statute. Murder, you could still be eligible for parole. So that was all part of our nation's war on drugs. When the war on drugs began, President Reagan was in the White House and they passed legislation to try and change that. Over the years, it has resulted in us, in our nation, incarcerating more people than any other nation and having huge recidivism rates. So that's kind of how it began. That's why I would say it didn't necessarily get better. I would say that it got worse. It was better when I came in. Then when they passed that law, things got worse. When we changed the law in 1987. That was the law for many years, where there was guidelines were mandatory and judges had to impose a sentence within the guidelines until the Supreme Court ruled in the Booker case that guidelines would become advisory. That was a big change, because now all of a sudden people could start working to change their life, and before sentencing I'm talking about. Then that became status quo for many, many years until 2018, when President Trump, during his first administration, passed the First Step Act, which really opened the doors for people to begin advocating for themselves. So there were more opportunities now for people to work toward earning freedom, a concept that I wrote about when you and I were together in prison.
And that leads into part of the response we'll give in the webinar, is like how long it could actually take for change, especially of a bureaucracy of this size, to happen. So in 2008, when I was next to you in prison, you began handwriting Earning Freedom. There was no email even in prison yet at the time. You just handwrote it. And Earning Freedom is about incentivizing excellence, building your way home. It took 10 years for that law to pass, and there was a ton that happened in between. I share that for people watching. These things, take time, and progress takes, quite a bit of time, because there was so much between writing the book and even the law passing amongst you and others to even make it a reality.
So that is an important data point, I think, is perspective. When I've served 26 years, I have a depth of perspective that other people don't have. The flip side of that is I also have patience. I understand how much effort goes into bringing change. And and in the previous video, you asked me that question. I'm going to talk about why it was different. I'd never been arrested before. I'd never been incarcerated before this offense. And when I got arrested, I spent the first year of my term in solitary confinement. So I didn't have interaction with a lot of other people who were serving time, and I didn't get to learn about prison. I was just in a hole. And it wasn't until I started reading that I had a change in perspective. And that perspective came really after a jury convicted me of every count, and I knew I was facing multiple decades in prison. I read a book, many books, but one of them was the autobiography of Frederick Douglas. I didn't know who he was when I was there. It was just, I was looking to learn from people who had gone through a crisis. And Frederick Douglass was born during the era of slavery. So he didn't know any other life besides being enslaved until he was 20 years old. And when he was 20, he escaped. And when he escaped, he didn't go on just to think about himself and his own life. He recognized that I want to change the system and abolish slavery. But he had to overcome a lot of obstacles first, and he understood that. He had the foresight to know, I'd better learn how to read, and I'd better learn how to write, and I'd better learn how to communicate. And those tools will help me become a voice for those people who are still enslaved. And then when I read that book, it inspired me to say, maybe that's something that I can do, is to work to change the system, change the way people see it, because many people will not know about this concept of parole in years to come. I could kind of see that in the future. This is going to be the future. The prison system is going to get bigger. And it did. It grew enormously bigger. And it did not have the result that I think that citizens wanted. We have extremely high recidivism rates. It influences people of color and people of low financial means more than any others. And it perpetuates these intergenerational cycles of poverty and intergenerational cycles of recidivism. You spoke about earning freedom, and I was writing it by hand. I wrote a lot of books by hand, but there was a reason for those books. They were small little tools that I could use to communicate at scale. If I could get books into universities, that would mean students would learn from the thought process that I had. If I could get students to learn, they might eventually go into the prison system, and hopefully they will have taken what they've learned into the prison system. And so this was the way I could scale my work. And then from writing books, that would lead to relationships with university professors, and university professors that could then introduce me to policymakers or administrators. And then we could build programs in, and I could help people in prison understand, what do you have to do, right? It is a very big, heavy lift that doesn't generate revenues. But the only reason that I could have this voice is because I did a quarter century. and because I did what I'm asking other people to do. Every American citizen has a relationship to our nation's prison system. And it's our job to try and show what can we do better. Not just complain about this isn't fair and it's terrible and there's no loss and I shouldn't have all those things. It's saying I have to live in the world as it exists.
Well, that leads to, if I can draw an analogy, a question we get a lot. So if Douglas was persuading people, including some who supported slavery, people have asked, especially when they see the site or they see you've gone into so many prisons, like how will a staff member respond? Is it all favorable? Do some walk out? Are some disgusted that someone who served so long in prison is coming to present? People in our community ask. I think it'd be interesting to offer some insights on the response to you, if you don't mind sharing.
One of the advantages of serving 26 years in prison is you get very used to rejection, and that's okay. You know, I have to live with...
Is there a thick skin? Does it bother you at all?
No, I feel as though I have a duty and a responsibility to change the system. That's my job. That's what gives me purpose in life and meaning of the journey that I served. But I recognize that there are a lot of people that don't know another path. They don't know about a prison system, what it would mean to have a concept where people could earn freedom. There are many people in the system that's all they know is the system through which they've been trained. If any staff member came into the prison system after 1987, this is the only system they know. A system that is exquisitely designed to obliterate hope. And they may have the mindset that says, I don't believe in the work that you do. If a federal judge sentenced you to 20 years, you should serve 20 years. We should not be rewarding you for doing what you're supposed to do. That is the concept of thinking of the process. They think that the process is what's important. Serve the time. That's not a CEO mindset. You got to focus on the result. What do you want? You want a safer society. You want more people living as law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. You don't want children growing up in prison visiting rooms so that they think it's normal. And so I focus on the result. And that result, to get that result that I want, I know I have to change laws. I have to change policies. I have to create training programs to help staff members understand. I have to help citizens understand, who say, oh, we shouldn't be providing education to people in prison. I understand that's an obstacle. So my job is to go out and raise money and figure out ways to give it away for free. That whole concept is all part of a very methodical strategy. But yes, I face resistance, but it's never about me. I don't care. I care about the system. I care about the people. I care about 1 million people serving time in prison, and there are hundreds of thousands that could very easily be home. And that's my job, is to try and change it so that thousands of people who don't belong in prison would be home with their families, earning an income, and being overseen by a system in a far more efficient way than what we currently have. Good. So that's what we're doing here, is we're trying to show people in our community, how do you think of the result that you want? Not the process, the result. And that means figuring out, what do I have to do? I make 3 promises. I'm never going to lie to you. I'm never going to ask anybody to do anything I didn't do while I was in prison and that I'm not still doing today. And 3, nobody's going to pay me a penny for anything that we give away for free on prisonprofessors.org, and everything's free on prisonprofessors.org. But if you want that personal guidance, which you may need, reach our sponsor. All right, I'm Michael Santos, founder of Prison Professors. We believe in you.